My heart is a beep, beep, beating inside my chest. Until I get your loving, I won't get no rest. No matter what you say or do, what kind of hell you gonna put me through, I'm gonna walk back to your arms. Yeah, you're gonna talk with all your charm.
Well, having Asperger's syndrome is not exactly what you would first pick when you're creating a character, but that is the character of Don Tillman, who was created by author Graeme Simpson, and when he wrote The Rosie Project. It's a romance fiction novel that follows Professor Don Tillman, who struggles to have a serious relationship with women. With a friend's help, he devises a questionnaire to assess the suitability of female partners, but his plans are set off course when he meets Rosie, who doesn't fill many of Tillman's criteria, but goes on to be a big part in his life. Moving on 3 years, we have a second book, which is called The Rosie Effect. Well, Graeme Simpson told me that he didn't actually intend to write this book. In fact, there was a movie which was originally the script, which is what became the film when he wrote it in 2013. And finally, he managed to get around to finishing the actual script, and of course the novel, as we all know. However, he didn't expect the reaction to go the way it did, but he kind of felt that he left Don hanging with Rosie, and he wanted to find out what married life was like. So he tells me a little bit about this in the new book, which is called The Rosie Effect.
He creates a project to choose the perfect partner. So a 16-page double-sided questionnaire to eliminate all the women who've given him grief on dates in the past, because he hasn't been terribly successful in that in the past.
With that in the past. This is like Sheldon Cooper, really, isn't it?
Well, a lot of people have said it's like being in Sheldon Cooper's head. I have never watched The Big Bang Theory, but clearly we're on very similar territory. We're dealing with someone with Asperger's syndrome, and we seem to have characterised him. You know, at least there's quite a lot of overlap between the two. I'd like to think they're different characters because there are gradations and, you know, lots of differences in personality above and beyond having Asperger's.
Indeed. With the first book, how did the community react to it? Because I would imagine they might have felt a little bit kind of challenged, perhaps.
Oh, no, the Asperger's community, the autism community, has been unbelievably supportive of the Rosie Project, and now we seem to be getting the same sort of feedback on the Rosie Effect. I get lots of feedback from that community. I get invited along to speak to groups and so forth. Basically, they see Don Tillman as being a good role model, if you like, a good exemplar of someone with Asperger's who is sympathetic, decent, and makes a success of his life.
Now, I read somewhere that you'd had one or two places where you'd either done a book reading or somebody had given the book to somebody else who'd been, I guess, encouraged when they thought a family member perhaps had Asperger's, and they would read this book and say, now I get it.
Well, there's one case in the UK where the guy I was told about, where the guy read the book. He said, I can't see anything weird about Don Tillman at all. And his sister said, maybe you should go along and see a psychologist. He went along and, of course, was diagnosed with Asperger's as, you know, a guy in his 40s. Another story just the other night, the woman was telling me that they'd been trying to persuade their father that he had Asperger's syndrome, just to get him to acknowledge it so that things might be easier in terms of dealing with him and so forth. They give him a number of books on Asperger's syndrome, and he rejected them very, very strongly. You know, this is not me. Then they gave him the Rosie Project. He read it and he said, I'm coming out. So, and I think it's because people love this Don Tillman character, and, you know, if you feel that you've got somebody out there who's a role model that people are looking at very positively, then it's not quite so hard, perhaps.
Indeed, and I guess one of the things I really liked about the book is it kind of shows that everyone really can succeed if they put their mind to it. In this particular case, maybe with a spreadsheet.
Yeah, well, Don is someone who's very good at putting his mind to things. That's his great strength, focus and intellectual sort of approach. And look, I'm not saying that everybody can make it, and I'm certainly not trying to say that people with Asperger's should be trying to behave in a certain way or otherwise. But I'm trying to offer a just a reasonably uplifting view that there's room for diversity, that there's different people, there's room in this world for people who approach things differently.
Now, I know you've been asked this question probably plenty of times, but first of all, it's a two-part question. Where did Don come from in your mind? And then when you took him forward into the future where he's now married and having to deal with that whole scenario post the honeymoon period, has he changed, or did you have to change him to face the situations that you've put him in?
No. Well, look, Don, people say, how much research on Asperger's did you do? And my answer is 30 years working in information technology. Don is not based on anybody who's been diagnosed with Asperger's. He's based on the sorts of guys I used to hang out with and still do in my information technology career. So, geeks, guys that we never said had Asperger's because that diagnosis wasn't around. So he feels very real to me rather than somebody who's just been created out of a textbook. For a long time, I didn't even acknowledge that he had Asperger's syndrome. It's just that the Asperger's community have welcomed him as one of them, and psychologists have said to me, well, obviously he's got Asperger's, so okay, let's accept that as given. But going into the second book, Don hasn't changed to my mind very much at all. He's learned a few social skills in dealing with his wife, Rosie. As you would expect, he spent 10 months or so living with her. He's by no means stupid. He's quite capable of learning. He just finds certain things harder to learn than perhaps the so-called neurotypicals. But he's going to get there eventually, particularly focused on her and having a motivation for it. But otherwise, I didn't change him.
Yeah, no, I think you have maybe haven't changed him, but you've certainly done a couple of things. First of all, I believe you didn't really have the intention of writing this book. This is actually a distraction from another book. Is that correct?
Well, I think distraction is probably putting it down a little bit. I had no intention of writing a sequel. I really tied up the loose ends in the Rosie Project with a view that there would not be a sequel. There was no pressure from my publishers. I just said, it's not going to happen. I was well advanced with another book when I decided to come back to it for all sorts of reasons. None of them really commercial. It was more a case of I felt Don still had some life in him, but I'd been convinced there shouldn't be sequels to romantic comedies. But essentially, I changed my mind and felt we could keep on. It's not a romantic comedy. The second book, it's about a relationship rather than about courting. But when I came back to it, of course, I had made my bed. I had finished off the first book with them living in New York, Don working at Columbia, hanging out with his new friend Dave. So these were the building blocks that I had to start with.
Now, Rosie doesn't like Dave, does she?
No, Rosie's okay with Dave. With Dave, the baseball fan. Her problem is with Jean, her supervisor, who comes to live with them. Yeah.
Yes, so that pulls in a rather interesting scenario. Plus, of course, you put them in a pressure cooker type situation, being stuck in a small New York flat, which I guess would be enough to test any relationship.
Well, that was the idea too. I mean, a lot of people have said to me, you're being unrealistic in this happy ending in the first book, that these guys, their relationship wouldn't survive. Don's too weird. And I was a little affronted by that because I think I know plenty of people who are weirder than Don who have been able to make relationships work in their own way. And I thought, okay, let's have a good look at this relationship, but let's put it under some serious pressure. Let's bring in Don's best friend and Rosie's worst enemy, Jean, put them in the pressure cooker in a small New York flat. Let's get her pregnant. Let's really crank it up and see how they deal with it.
So they rocket on this one. Do you think there's a third novel perhaps in maybe 5 years' time or something? I mean, children is the ultimate where that's going.
Well, you took the words out of my mouth. Yep, I think there might be a third novel. It would be at about 5 years' time, perhaps about 7 years in literary time. I've said that part of the premise of the Rosie Effect is that Rosie gets pregnant, so we can guess what the outcome of that will be. So let's perhaps roll along 7 years or so and revisit them to see what sort of new stresses and challenges they might be facing.
You've named these as I guess it's going to be a series of romantic comedies of sorts, of that sort of thing. But I mean, I'm not sure if that quite fits the genre. You're sort of having trouble trying to fit that yourself. I mean, one of the things I found really interesting is it's really good from a guy's point of view to read this and to be able to feel it's not, the chick lit style thing. I guess it's because you're a male writing. Who was your intended audience? Did you have one in mind?
Well, look, story. And when I went along to talk to my publisher, and they said, "Who do you imagine your audience being?" I said, "Well, I'm a middle-aged male. I've got a 40-year-old male protagonist. I guess men are going to want to read this." And they said, "Think again. That most novels about relationships are read by women." And that's certainly been my primary audience. But so many of them say to their partners, their male partners, or other people in their family, "You've got to read this. You're going to like this." And you don't say to them it's romantic comedy. You say it's comedy. And certainly the second book does not fit the romantic comedy formula. It's still comedy. It's still Don Tillman, but we're now exploring a domestic relationship and a few other things around it. So it's no different in a sense. If you're talking about comedy, from watching any domestic comedy, you might be watching The Simpsons for that matter.
You talked about I know this is your third second book. I'm not sure which order, because you've got another one hiding away somewhere that you're working on. Where did this all come out? I mean, you're quite new to the writing scene. It's taken a while. You're middle-aged. You've taken quite a while to get all this out.
Yeah, well, I had another job before that. That's the problem. So I built a career in information technology and business consulting, and it was only at the age of 50 that I went back to school and started studying screenwriting, not novel writing. And I really spent 5 years at that, during which time I developed the screenplay for the Rosie Project. And at the end of that, and enrolled in the novel writing class, and sat down and reimagined it as a novel. And that's been successful in getting interest in the screenplay as I originally intended. But B, I frankly think it's a better way to tell Don Tillman's story. And
now, of course, there's a film coming too.
Yeah. Sony Pictures have optioned the film rights. I've delivered 2 drafts of the screenplay as per my contract, and it's now what they call in development, with rewriters, directors and producers all assigned, but no casting decisions made yet. And of course, no green light yet. But it's been on the New York Times bestseller list now for about 20 weeks. So that sales are what really gives these confidence that it's going to be a worthwhile project to go ahead with.